Mr Speaker.
This is a split call between the National Party and the Maori Party. I call the Honourable Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, now we know this news to me, but the Greens are now wanting to ban lifestyle blocks, a house with a bit of a section on it, so you could, I don't know, have some chickens, run a dog, kids could run around, a sand pit, grass between the toes. Now they want high-rise apartment blocks everywhere. Well, I find that very interesting. Maybe I've missed something over the last few months, but that was a new one to me. And we don't really want too many high-rise apartment blocks in Hawke's Bay to the member, so perhaps we could explore that a bit more. Mr Speaker, I do agree that this House expresses its confidence in the National-led government and commends its program for 2015 as set out in the Prime Minister's statement we heard a little while ago. Mr Speaker, we'll continue the hard work that we've been undertaking for the last 2 terms as we turn this country to a much brighter future, changing the framework to leading us to a small but confident nation, finding its way through the world, trading its way around the world, growing jobs, looking after our families, delivering on those social issues that concern us, particularly as Kiwis, while also at the same time growing our economy. Mr Speaker, I wasn't going to go back, but a previous speaker started talking about the 2008 preview. Now, that was the one before the election which the National Government came in. Interestingly, the same speaker around that time said something like, Labor's not looking back, and then he started talking about the preview. And he raised some of the points in it, be fair enough, but listeners should remember, because in that same preview, it talked about interest rates, it talked about inflation rates, and it talked about migration, I believe, in that same preview. So given the data that previous member talked about, this is what's not happening under a national government with our prudent management of the economy, our focus on better public services. This is what's not happening, but this is what did happen in the years 05 to 08, particularly under the previous government. Mortgage rates were over 10%. Floating mortgage rates were over 10%. Working capital for businesses was well through double figures under the Labor government. Inflation was nudging 5%. Inflation was nudging 5%, Mr Speaker, under the Labor government. In that preview, it's now almost flat to under 1% under this government. Migration, Mr Speaker, New Zealand families, Kiwis in their droves, 30 to 40,000 a year, were abandoning the policies of the Labor government with their feet and moving offshore. Friends, family, whānau left, some for good. Now, Mr Speaker, that net result is around 0 to positive, Kiwis not leaving and coming home. That is absolute stark difference between this national government and what we inherited from that Labor government all those years ago. Mr Speaker, the previous speaker also talked about small businesses in New Zealand, and I do quote from Andrew Little's speech earlier in the year, because I agree with him under this one. Small businesses, the engine room of job growth, is what New Zealand is. That's quite correct. And he talks about Labor priorities. Fair enough, he can say those things. But as I mentioned in the answer to a question today, cash flow is king for small businesses. Right. It's the cash flow struggle which really struggles and spends so much time for small businesses. So it's helpful if they pay the bills. Because in this example here, a small business was not paid for 4 months after sending an invoice to one Andrew Little. For 4 months. He did get a response. This is the person that sent the invoice. I wrote up my notes as best I could and sent them off along with an invoice for time spent. Both were received with thanks. Thanks, we got your invoice. That was it. 4 months later, no payment, no part payment, no deposit, no engagement, nothing. Cash is king for small businesses. And when the leader of the opposition party does not pay bills due 4 months ago, serious questions need to be asked of not only their policies, but perhaps of the gentleman himself. Mr Speaker, small businesses are the engine room of the economy, that's right, and they've gone from strength to strength in the last 6 or 7 years. Labor would drop the 90-day trial, we're keeping it. Labor would drop the starting out wage, we're keeping it. Labor would bring in big minimum wage increases, we're keeping them sustainable as we can to pay our people more, Mr Speaker. I could go on, the point being the context, the environment, the parameters under which small and large businesses have to operate under Labor is not very flash at all. Those same circumstances can be witnessed by the economic metrics before us today, be it measured by migration, measured by very low inflation, measured by high GDP growth across the OECD in New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, I could go on. Things are looking very, very good. We've done a lot of hard work. There's a lot to do, and we will continue to focus on those most important things that matter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker.
The Honourable Te Ura Flavel.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Kia ora tātou katoa, ka tainu